The sound of splintering would hit me before I even opened the front door. I'd taken the red-eye from Seattle, exhausted from 3 days of negotiations that would reshape downtown development for the next decade. All I wanted was to collapse onto my grandmother's antique settee and sleep for 12 hours straight. Instead, I stood frozen on my own porch, keys in hand, listening to what sounded like a demolition crew destroying my home from the inside out. Through the original leaded glass window, the one I'd spent 6 months sourcing replacement panes for, I watched dust clouds billow through what used to be my living room. A man I didn't recognize swung a sledgehammer at the fireplace mantel. My fireplace mantel. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The 1924 Batchelder tile work that architectural historians had written papers about. My sister Vanessa stood in the corner, ring light position just so, filming herself gesturing dramatically at the destruction while her lips moved in that exaggerated way she used for her renovation videos. I turned the key slowly. The door swung open, and my mother's voice pierced through the chaos of power tools and crumbling plaster. Finally. The crown molding in the bedroom is rotting, Emma. Rotting. How you've lived like this, I'll never understand. Thank goodness Vanessa agreed to help before this whole place fell down around your ears. Linda Chen stood in the center of my gutted living room wearing a designer tracksuit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, completely oblivious to the fact that she was orchestrating the destruction of irreplaceable craftsmanship. Her hair was swept up in the kind of casual elegance that took a professional stylist an hour to achieve, and her manicured hand gestured dismissively at the exposed studs where my walls used to be. Vanessa finally noticed me, lowering her phone with an expression of delighted surprise that I knew she'd been practicing. Emma. Oh my God, you're home early. Don't worry, we're documenting everything for the insurance. This is going to be amazing content. My followers are going to die when they see the transformation. I set down my briefcase carefully, the one that contained contracts worth $40 million, and surveyed the damage with a calm I'd perfected over years of high-stakes negotiations. The original fir floors, the ones I'd been hand-restoring board by board for 3 years, had been ripped up and tossed in a pile by the door. The built-in bookshelves my grandfather had crafted were dismantled, their pieces scattered like kindling. Someone had already started on the kitchen, and I could see my vintage farmhouse sink lying on its side in the backyard through the window they'd apparently removed without bothering to cover the opening. What have you done? The words came out quietly, barely audible over the grinding of someone's circular saw upstairs. What we should have done months ago, my mother said, stepping over debris with the confidence of someone who believed she was saving the day. This house has been a money pit since you bought it. A complete disaster. Vanessa's contractor boyfriend Tyler said the whole place needs to be gutted anyway, so we're getting ahead of it. You can thank us later. Tyler. The contractor boyfriend who'd been banned from 3 renovation projects in the past year for shoddy work and cost overruns. The one whose business license was currently under review by the state board. I knew this because I sat on the licensing committee, though my mother and sister had no idea about that particular detail of my life. You broke into my house, I said, still maintaining that dangerous calm. Vanessa laughed, the sound bright and dismissive. Don't be dramatic. Mom has the spare key you gave her for emergencies, remember? And this definitely qualifies. Emma, the foundation is literally crumbling. Tyler showed us. You could have been hurt. The foundation I'd had reinforced last year by the best structural engineers in the Pacific Northwest. The foundation that was now rated to withstand a magnitude 8 earthquake. That foundation. I walked through what remained of my living room, stepping carefully over chunks of plaster and avoiding the places where they'd already started tearing up the subfloor. In the kitchen, they'd removed the vintage tile backsplash I'd sourced from a demolished hotel in San Francisco. Each tile had been individually numbered and reset by a craftsman who specialized in historic preservation. Those tiles were now in a dumpster in my driveway, mixed with broken drywall and splintered trim. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The permits, I said, turning back to face them. You pulled permits for this work? My mother waved a hand vaguely. Tyler handles all that technical stuff. He's a professional, Emma. Not like you, playing around with this house for years without making any real progress. When was the last time you actually finished a project? Last month. When I'd completed the restoration of the Fitzgerald building downtown, a $12 million project that had won 3 architectural preservation awards. But my mother didn't know about that. She thought I worked as a freelance architectural consultant, taking on small residential projects when I could find them, barely scraping by in this cute little house I'd bought with what she assumed was the last of my savings. The truth was considerably different. The truth was that Chin Development Group, the company transforming Portland's urban landscape with sustainable, community-focused projects, was mine. The anonymous donor who'd saved 6 historic buildings from demolition last year was me. The consultant the City Planning Commission called when they needed expertise on preservation versus progress was standing in this gutted living room, watching her family destroy one of the most architecturally significant craftsman bungalows in the Laurelhurst district. I'd bought this house 5 years ago, not because I needed it, but because I'd fallen in love with its bones. The way afternoon light filtered through those original windows. The hand-carved details in the woodwork that spoke of an era when craftsmanship mattered more than speed. The history embedded in every corner, every carefully mortised joint, every piece of irreplaceable tile. I'd been restoring it slowly, personally, because some things deserved to be done right rather than fast. My mother mistook my silence for acceptance. I know change is hard, sweetheart, but you'll see. Once Vanessa works her magic, this place will finally be worth something. We might even be able to sell it for what you paid, maybe a little more if we're lucky. Then you can move into something more practical. A nice condo. Something that doesn't require so much work. Vanessa had moved on to filming the upstairs, her voice carrying down through the torn-out ceiling. So this bedroom is giving major dungeon vibes, you guys. The previous owner clearly had zero taste. But don't worry, we're going to open this up, add some shiplap, maybe a statement light fixture. It's going to be gorge. The previous owner was my grandmother. The woman who taught me to see beauty in old things, to value history over trends, to understand that some treasures were worth preserving even when everyone else wanted to tear them down and start over. This had been her house before mine, and she'd left it to me specifically because she knew I'd protect it. I pulled out my phone, and my mother smiled with what she probably thought was encouragement. I know it's overwhelming, honey, but try to have vision. Vanessa showed me the mood boards. Very modern farmhouse. Clean lines. You'll love it. I wasn't calling to cry or complain. I was calling Marcus Thompson, my business partner and the person who handled situations exactly like this one. He answered on the first ring. Emma? Thought you were sleeping off the Seattle trip. I need you to send our attorney to my personal address. Now. Also, call the city inspections office. I want to know if any permits were filed for work at this location in the past month. His tone shifted immediately. What's happening? Unauthorized demolition of a historic property. Possible permit violations. And Marcus, bring the files on the Laurelhurst restoration project. All of them. I could hear him moving already, grabbing keys and documents. 20 minutes. My mother had gone very still. Emma, who were you talking to? What files? The ones that explain why this house is on the National Register of Historic Places. The ones that detail every original element that makes it architecturally significant. The ones that outline the penalties for unpermitted demolition of protected structures. I looked around at the destruction, calculating damages in my head. The ones that are going to be very relevant when the city inspector arrives. Vanessa came thundering down the stairs, phone still recording. Wait, what? National Register? Emma, stop being so extra. Tyler said this house was basically worthless. Tyler's wrong. I walked to where they'd torn out a section of wall, exposing the original framing. See these Douglas fir studs? Old growth. Irreplaceable. This plaster? Original lime plaster with horsehair. These floors you ripped up. Quarter-sawn oak in a pattern that doesn't exist anymore. Do you have any idea what you've destroyed? The sound of a truck door slamming outside made us all turn. Through the glassless window, I watched Marcus arrive with James Rivera, my attorney, both of them taking in the dumpster full of architectural history with expressions that would have been comical under different circumstances. My mother's face had gone pale. Emma, surely we can talk about this. We were trying to help. By breaking into my house and destroying it? We have a key. And you're being ridiculous about a few old pieces of wood. Marcus appeared in the doorway, stepping carefully over the threshold. His eyes swept the room, cataloging damage with the practiced assessment of someone who'd spent 20 years in historic preservation. Emma. You're going to want to see this. He led me to the kitchen, where they'd torn into the wall behind the stove. They've compromised a load-bearing wall. The second floor is being supported by basically nothing right now. James was already on his phone with the city. Yes, emergency structural concern. No permits on file. Historic property. We need someone here immediately. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Vanessa's face had shifted from confused to calculating. Hold on. Marcus Thompson? Wait, aren't you the Marcus Thompson from Chin Development? The company that just won that huge award? My mother's head snapped toward me. Emma? What is she talking about? This wasn't how I'd planned to tell them. I'd honestly thought I never would. For 5 years, I'd maintained 2 completely separate lives, letting my family believe I was struggling while I built something remarkable. It had been easier that way. No expectations. No demands. No one trying to claim credit for success they'd never supported. But standing in the wreckage of my grandmother's house, watching my mother's face cycle through confusion and dawning realization, I understood that the careful separation I'd maintained was about to shatter as completely as the plaster dust coating every surface. The city inspector arrived within 15 minutes, followed closely by someone from the Historic Preservation Office. My mother and sister watched in growing horror as official after official documented the damage, took photographs, and began issuing violations. Tyler, it turned out, had pulled no permits whatsoever. The work was completely unauthorized, performed on a protected structure without approval from any of the necessary oversight boards. Ms. Chen, the preservation officer said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. I can't even begin to calculate the damage here. Some of these elements were irreplaceable. The Batchelder tiles alone. She shook her head. Who authorized this? No one, I said quietly. I came home to find it in progress. She turned to my mother and sister. Did you receive written permission from the property owner to perform this work? Vanessa looked at my mother. My mother looked at me. The silence stretched out, broken only by the sound of the inspector photographing code violations upstairs. She's my daughter, my mother finally said, as if that explained everything. I have a key. A key doesn't grant you legal authority to demolish someone's property. The officer made another note. The fines for this are going to be substantial. The restoration costs will be even more so. That's when my mother said the thing that made everything that followed inevitable. Emma can't afford restoration costs. She can barely afford to live here. That's why we were fixing it. Marcus and James both turned to look at me, waiting. Vanessa's phone was still recording, though she'd lowered it slightly. The preservation officer paused in her documentation. I thought about my grandmother, who'd lived in this house for 40 years and taught me that worth wasn't about what others could see. I thought about the years I'd spent learning this business, building my company, proving myself without the weight of family expectations. I thought about coming home after closing the biggest deal of my career to find everything I'd carefully preserved torn to pieces. I own Chin Development Group, I said simply. I can afford the restoration. The silence in my demolished living room felt heavier than the dust still settling from the torn-out walls. My mother's perfectly composed expression cracked like the plaster scattered across what used to be my grandmother's oak floors. Vanessa's phone finally stopped recording, her arm dropping slowly to her side as the implications of what I'd just said began registering in her influencer-trained brain. "You're joking," my mother said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Chin Development Group. That's some big corporate entity. You work from a laptop at coffee shops." "I work from anywhere I need to," I replied evenly. "Coffee shops. Construction sites. City planning meetings. The governor's economic development task force. It's efficient." Marcus had moved to the window opening, examining the damage to the frame with the careful attention he gave every project. "Emma, we're going to need environmental testing before we can start restoration. If they disturbed any lead paint or asbestos without proper containment protocols, this becomes a hazmat situation." James was still on his phone, but I caught the edge of his conversation with what sounded like the district attorney's office. The words, "criminal negligence," and "property destruction," filtered through, and I watched the color drain from Tyler's face as he finally emerged from upstairs, sledgehammer still in hand. "Wait," Vanessa said, her voice taking on that particular pitch she used when she was trying to regain control of a situation. "If you own Chin Development, then you're the one who bought the Morrison building. And the waterfront project. And that whole block in the Pearl District. Among other things." I picked up a piece of my grandmother's hand-carved crown molding from the pile of debris, running my fingers over the intricate details that someone had spent hours creating nearly a century ago. "I also own the building where you rent your studio space, Vanessa. The one you're 3 months behind on." Her face went white. "That's not possible. The management company is called something else. Cascade Properties or something." Cascade Properties is a subsidiary of Chin Development Group. We own 47 residential and commercial properties across the metro area. Your building is one of them. I set the wood down carefully. Your rent is 2 months overdue, actually. Not 3. The third notice goes out tomorrow. My mother had sunk onto the one piece of furniture they hadn't yet destroyed, an old crate I'd been using to store restoration supplies. "This doesn't make sense. You drive that awful little hybrid. You wear clothes from discount stores. You live in this tiny house. I drive a fuel-efficient vehicle because I care about environmental impact. I wear practical clothes because I'm usually on construction sites or in meetings where what matters is my ideas, not my outfit. And this house is not tiny. It's 1,800 square feet of historically significant architecture that you just destroyed." The preservation officer closed her tablet with a decisive snap. "Ms. Chen, I'm going to need you to come down to the office tomorrow to file formal complaints. Given the extent of the damage and the protected status of this property, we're looking at criminal charges in addition to the civil penalties." "Criminal charges?" My mother's voice pitched upward. "Over some old wood and tiles?" "Over the destruction of protected historical resources," the officer corrected sharply. "This isn't someone's personal preference. This house was designated as historically significant by the National Register. That designation carries legal weight. What happened here today is equivalent to vandalizing a museum." Tyler had been trying to edge toward the door, but James blocked his path with the casual stance of someone who'd spent years in courtrooms. "Mr. Morgan, I'd stay put if I were you. The city inspector is going to want to talk to you about the unpermitted work, and I have some questions about your contractor's license status." "I didn't know it was historic," Tyler protested. "Vanessa just said her sister needed help with a renovation." Vanessa turned on him with sudden fury. "You said the foundation was crumbling. You said the whole place was a disaster waiting to happen." "I said it needed work," he backtracked. "You're the one who said to just start tearing things out for content." I watched them turn on each other with the detachment that came from years of observing my family's dynamics. When things went well, they took credit collectively. When things fell apart, they scattered like leaves in wind, each trying to avoid blame. My brother Derek would have done the same if he'd been here, though he was probably showing an overpriced condo to someone who couldn't afford it, building his commission on other people's financial fantasies. The city inspector descended from upstairs with an expression that suggested he'd found even more violations than expected. "Ms. Chen, Are you aware that someone removed a load-bearing wall on the second floor? The bathroom up there is currently supported by good intentions and not much else. Marcus swore under his breath. James made another note. The preservation officer looked like she might be sick. How much? My mother asked suddenly. To fix all this. How much would it cost? I'd been running calculations since the moment I walked through the door. Original materials that would need to be sourced or replicated. Craftsmen with the skills to restore rather than replace. Structural engineering to repair the damage to load-bearing elements. Environmental remediation if they disturbed hazardous materials. Permit fees. Inspection costs. The numbers climbed higher with each passing minute. Conservatively, $300,000 for proper restoration. That's if we can source matching materials and if the structural damage isn't worse than it appears. If we have to replicate custom elements or if there's hidden damage, it could run double that. Vanessa made a choking sound. That's insane. You could buy a new house for that. I don't want a new house. I want my grandmother's house restored to the condition it was in before you broke in and destroyed it. We didn't break in, my mother said, but the words lacked her usual conviction. I have a key. You gave me a key for emergencies. Emergencies, I repeated. Medical crises. Natural disasters. Situations where I might need immediate help. Not carte blanche to demolish my home because you decided it didn't meet your aesthetic standards. The afternoon light was fading, streaming through the destroyed windows at an angle that highlighted every missing piece, every torn surface, every element of craftsmanship now sitting in a dumpster. My grandmother had stood in this room 60 years ago as a young bride, promising herself that she'd make this house a home. She'd kept that promise through decades of life's ordinary struggles, raising children, weathering losses, finding joy in the small beauties of well-made things that lasted. I need everyone who doesn't live here to leave, I said quietly. The inspector needs to finish documenting. My attorney needs to prepare the necessary filings. And I need to figure out how to secure this structure before someone gets hurt. My mother stood, trying to recover some dignity. Emma, surely we can discuss this as a family. Without lawyers and officials and all this hostility. You destroyed my house, Mom. While I was out of town. Without permission. You brought in an unlicensed contractor who compromised the structural integrity of the building. This stopped being a family discussion the moment you broke the law. I was trying to help, she said, and for the first time, I heard genuine distress in her voice rather than just wounded pride. You spend all your time working on this house, and it never seems to get finished. I thought if we just pushed it along, got it done, you could finally move on with your life. Move on to what? A life that looks like yours? Expensive clothes and leased cars and a house mortgaged to the ceiling? A life spent maintaining appearances instead of building something real? The words hung between us, sharper than I'd intended but truer than anything I'd said to her in years. My mother's life was a carefully constructed performance, every element designed to project success to people whose opinions shouldn't matter. She'd been playing that role for so long I wasn't sure she remembered what lay underneath. I have a beautiful home, she said stiffly. You have a house you can't afford in a neighborhood full of people you don't actually like, and you're terrified someone will figure out that Dad's business is failing and the whole thing is smoke and mirrors. Her face went rigid. Your father's business is fine. Dad's business is bleeding money. Has been for 3 years. I know because he approached my company last year about a development partnership. We turned him down because his financials didn't support the risk profile. Vanessa's head whipped around. Dad tried to work with your company? He didn't know it was my company. The proposal came through official channels. Our investment team reviewed it, found it lacking, and declined. Standard business practice. The preservation officer had been listening to this exchange with the uncomfortable expression of someone witnessing family dysfunction they wanted no part of. She cleared her throat. I'm going to step outside and finish my report. Ms. Chen, you can reach me at the office tomorrow. After she left, Marcus moved to stand beside me, his presence a quiet reminder that I wasn't alone in this. Emma, we should probably get structural engineers here tonight. If that upstairs bathroom is really unsupported, we've got a safety issue that can't wait for daylight. Already on it, James said, ending another phone call. Jensen Engineering is sending someone within the hour. Also, I've documented everything for the insurance claim and the civil suit. The criminal complaint will be filed by the city, but you'll need to decide if you want to pursue personal charges. My mother flinched at the word charges. Vanessa had gone very quiet, her earlier bravado completely deflated. Tyler looked like he wanted to melt through the damaged floorboards and disappear. I need to make a call, I said, pulling out my phone. Marcus, can you coordinate with the engineers? James, start the paperwork for a restraining order. I want it legally clear that no one enters this property without my explicit written permission. Emma, you can't be serious, my mother said. A restraining order? Against your own family? Watch me. I walked out onto the porch, away from the dust and destruction, and called the one person whose opinion had shaped everything I'd built. Dr. Patricia Hayes answered on the third ring, her voice warm with the affection of a mentor who'd become something closer to family than my actual relatives had ever been. Emma Chen, calling at dinner time. This must be important. They destroyed it, Patricia. The bungalow. My mother and sister. They broke in while I was in Seattle and tore out everything. The floors, the tiles, the built-ins. Everything. The pause on the other end spoke volumes. Patricia had been the one who'd encouraged me to buy the house, who'd recognized my passion for preservation and helped me channel it into a career. She'd mentored me through graduate school, introduced me to the clients who'd become the foundation of my business, and taught me that success was measured in legacy, not in quarterly profits. How bad? She asked finally. National Register property. Unpermitted demolition. Structural damage. Criminal charges probably. Another pause. And emotionally? How are you handling this? I looked back through the missing window at my mother and sister, both of them looking smaller somehow in the wreckage they'd created. I'm furious. And hurt. And also weirdly relieved that it's finally out in the open. They know now. About the company, about everything. That must feel complicated. It feels like standing in the ruins of two things I loved. The house and the illusion that my family might someday see me clearly enough to respect my choices. Emma. Patricia's voice held the gentle firmness that had guided me through a dozen crises. Some people are constitutionally incapable of seeing past their own narratives. Your mother built her identity on a specific story about success. You choosing a different path challenged that story. Her destroying your house wasn't really about the house. It was about control. It was about fear. Fear that if your way of living is valid, then maybe her way isn't the only path. Maybe all those years of appearances and performance weren't necessary. That's a terrifying realization. I watched the structural engineer's truck pull up, followed by one of my senior project managers who must have heard about the crisis through company channels. People who respected my work were arriving to help. People who saw me clearly because I'd never hidden from them. I don't know if I can forgive this, I said quietly. You don't have to decide that tonight. Tonight you just have to secure the structure and keep people safe. The rest can wait. After we hung up, I returned to find the house had filled with my professional team. Engineers assessing damage. Contractors calculating repairs. My project manager coordinating with Marcus on immediate stabilization needs. They moved through the space with practiced efficiency, seeing past the destruction to the solutions beneath. My mother and Vanessa had been relegated to one corner, observers now rather than actors. They watched my team work with expressions that cycled between confusion, resentment, and something that might have been the first stirrings of understanding. This was real. The company was real. My success was real. And they'd just destroyed something I valued in service of a help I'd never asked for. The bathroom upstairs needs immediate shoring, the lead engineer reported. We can stabilize it tonight, but full repairs are going to take weeks. The good news is the foundation is solid. Whatever that contractor told them about it crumbling was complete fiction. Can you document that? James asked. For the lawsuit? Already taking photos. The engineer headed back upstairs, shaking his head at the incompetence he'd found. Vanessa finally broke her silence. You're really going to sue us? Your own family. You really destroyed my house, I countered. Without permission. Without concern for what it meant to me. Without even asking if I wanted your help. What did you expect? I expected you to be grateful, she said, and the honesty of it was almost refreshing. I thought you'd see that we were trying to do something nice. Give you a house you could finally be proud of instead of this endless project. I was proud of it. Every board I restored. Every detail I preserved. Every piece of history I kept alive. This house was my legacy project. The thing I worked on because I loved it, not because it made financial sense. It was never meant to be content for your social media or a quick flip for profit. The words landed hard. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears, though whether from genuine remorse or frustration at being thwarted, I couldn't tell. My mother remained silent, her earlier justifications exhausted, leaving only the uncomfortable reality of consequences she hadn't anticipated. We'll need to bring in environmental testing tomorrow, Marcus said, pulling me back to logistics. Given the age of the house, there's definitely lead paint. Might be asbestos in some of the materials they disturbed. We need clearance before we can proceed with cleanup. The costs kept mounting. The complexity kept expanding. And my family kept standing there, finally understanding that the daughter they dismissed had built something substantial enough to withstand their worst impulses while still holding them accountable for the damage they'd caused. The morning after the destruction came with the kind of clarity that only sleepless nights can provide. I'd spent the hours between midnight and dawn in a hotel room, unable to stay in my compromised house, reviewing structural reports and calculating the full scope of what would need to happen next. The engineers had installed temporary supports to keep the second floor from collapsing, but the real work hadn't even begun. Marcus met me at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the house at 7 in the morning. He slid a folder across the table before I'd even ordered, his expression grim. Environmental report came back preliminary. They found lead paint disturbance in 4 rooms and possible asbestos in the ceiling material they tore out. We need full abatement before anyone can go back in there without hazmat gear. I opened the folder, scanning numbers that kept climbing. Abatement alone would run $40,000. Then structural repairs. Then restoration of the historic elements. Then replacement of what couldn't be salvaged. The total was approaching $500,000, and that assumed we could even find craftspeople capable of replicating the work that had been destroyed. Insurance? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Won't cover unauthorized demolition by family members. They're calling it intentional damage by someone with access. Specifically excluded from your policy. Marcus stirred his coffee with more force than necessary. James thinks we have a strong civil case. Your mother and sister would be jointly liable for damages. But collecting is another question. They don't have that kind of money. Not even close. Your mother's house is underwater. She owes more than it's worth. Vanessa's income last year was maybe $30,000, mostly from sponsored posts that have dried up. Tyler's business is barely solvent even before the fines hit. I stared out the window at the street where ordinary people were starting ordinary days, unaware that 3 blocks away sat a gutted piece of history that represented the gap between who I was and who my family had decided I should be. My phone had been vibrating steadily since 6, messages piling up from relatives I hadn't heard from in years, all suddenly interested in this family drama now that it involved money and potential criminal charges. The Preservation Society wants to meet, Marcus continued. They're talking about making an example of this case. Sending a message that you can't just destroy historic properties because you don't personally value them. They should. I closed the folder. If this can happen to a property I own, someone who actually understands the value, imagine what happens to historic buildings owned by people who don't know or don't care. This needs to have teeth. My phone lit up with a call from my brother Derek. I let it go to voicemail, then another call from an aunt, then my mother again. They were circling now, trying to manage the fallout, control the narrative, find some way to spin this that didn't make them look like exactly what they were. Vanessa posted about it, Marcus said, showing me his phone. Her Instagram story showed a carefully composed image of her looking tearful, with text overlaid that read, "Sometimes trying to help the people you love backfires. Sending prayers to my family during this difficult time." The comments beneath were split between her followers offering support and people who'd clearly read the news coverage calling her out for destroying a historic property. Someone had linked to the Preservation Society's statement condemning the demolition. Another had found articles about Shin Development Group and was putting together that the sister Vanessa had been trying to help was actually the CEO everyone in the industry knew by reputation. "She's making herself the victim," I said, handing the phone back. "That's what she does. Creates content out of everything, including her own mistakes." Marcus paused. "Your mother's been calling the office 4 times this morning. She wants to talk to you about settling this privately." "There's nothing private left to settle. The city filed charges. The Preservation Society is involved. The environmental violations are documented. This stopped being private the moment they started tearing out walls." A text came through from Patricia. "Thinking of you this morning. Remember that protecting what matters isn't the same as seeking revenge. Call if you need perspective." I did need perspective, but I wasn't sure I could handle it yet. The anger was still too fresh, too sharp. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those Batchelder tiles in the dumpster, the hand-carved molding in pieces, my grandmother's legacy reduced to debris because my family had decided they knew better than I did what I needed. "What do you want to do?" Marcus asked gently. "Not what's legally required or professionally appropriate. What do you actually want?" I considered the question while the coffee shop filled with morning customers, laptops opening, meetings starting, the business of the city flowing around us. What did I want? For the past 5 years, I'd wanted to be left alone to build something meaningful. I'd wanted my work to speak for itself without the complication of family expectations or judgments. I'd wanted the freedom to succeed or fail on my own terms, measured by my own standards rather than theirs. "I want them to understand what they destroyed," I said finally. "Not just the physical house, but what it represented. The choice to value substance over appearance. The decision to build slowly and carefully instead of fast and flashy. The idea that worth isn't determined by what other people can see. That's a tall order for people who've spent their lives doing the opposite." "I know." I finished my coffee, bitter and strong. But maybe facing real consequences will teach them what years of talking never could. We drove to the house together, arriving to find a small crowd gathered on the sidewalk. News van. Reporter with a camera. Several neighbors I recognized and a few I didn't. The story had apparently made the morning broadcasts, complete with footage of the dumpster full of historic materials and shots of the gaping windows. The reporter approached as I got out of the car. "Ms. Chen, can you comment on the charges being filed against your family? Is it true your mother and sister destroyed your home?" "No comment at this time." I moved past her toward the house, where crime scene tape now marked the perimeter. Not crime scene in the murder sense, but official documentation that this was an active investigation into property destruction and environmental violations. James was waiting inside with someone from the district attorney's office, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who introduced herself as Deputy DA Catherine Ross. She walked through the destruction with the careful attention of someone building a case, taking photos and notes while James explained the timeline of events. "The challenges here are interesting," she said, examining where they'd torn into the load-bearing wall. "Family members often have implied permission to enter homes. Keys are exchanged. Boundaries get blurry. But this level of destruction, the historic designation, the environmental violations, that changes things significantly." "Are you saying you won't prosecute?" I asked. "I'm saying we need to be strategic about which charges to pursue. The environmental violations are clear-cut. The unpermitted construction is documented. The destruction of historic property is unambiguous. Those are solid. The breaking and entering is murkier because of the family relationship and the key access. Marcus joined us, having finished his walkthrough with the structural engineers. Second floor is stable for now, but we found more damage. They tried to remove a chimney stack and didn't properly support the roof load. We're looking at significant structural repairs beyond what's visible. The costs kept climbing. The complexity kept expanding. And somewhere across town, my family was probably gathered at my mother's house, strategizing about how to minimize their exposure while still maintaining their innocence in their own minds. I'd seen this pattern before, the way they'd rewrite history to make themselves the reasonable ones, the ones who'd been trying to help, the ones victimized by my unreasonable response to their generous intervention. My phone rang again. Derek this time, and something made me answer. Emma, thank God. Listen, we need to talk about Mom and Vanessa. This has gotten completely out of hand. Has it? Because from where I'm standing, it seems appropriately proportionate to the damage they caused. They were trying to help you. Maybe they went about it the wrong way, but their intentions were good. Surely you can see that taking this to court, involving lawyers and prosecutors, that's just going to destroy the family. I walked away from the others, into what used to be my kitchen, where my grandmother had taught me to make pie crust by hand and told me stories about the neighborhood when it was young. The family was destroyed long before this, Derek. We just pretended otherwise. This is just the first time the destruction became visible enough that you couldn't ignore it. That's not fair. We're a normal family. We have our issues, but who doesn't? Normal families don't break into each other's homes and demolish them. Normal families don't spend years dismissing someone's work and then act shocked when that person doesn't want to share their success. Silence on the other end. Then, carefully, so it's true? About Chin development? You really own all that? Did you think I was lying when I said it yesterday? I thought maybe you were exaggerating. Making yourself sound more important than you are because you were upset. And there it was. The fundamental assumption that had defined our family dynamic for years. The certainty that I was somehow less than. That my successes must be exaggerated. That the life I'd built couldn't possibly be as substantial as it appeared because they'd decided long ago what my ceiling was. I'm the CEO and majority owner of Chin Development Group. We completed 18 major projects last year with a combined value of over $300 million. I sit on the City Planning Commission, the Historic Preservation Board, and the Sustainable Development Task Force. The governor asked me to consult on the state's affordable housing initiative. I'm not exaggerating, Derek. I'm understating because the full scope of what I do would take an hour to explain, and you've never cared enough to ask. More silence. Why didn't you tell us? Because every time I tried to talk about my work, you changed the subject or made jokes about my little architectural consulting hobby. Because Mom introduced me to her friends as the artistic one who never quite got her act together. Because at Thanksgiving 3 years ago, you all took bets on how long before I gave up and got a real job. We didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it, then? Help me understand the kind interpretation of years of dismissal and mockery. He had no answer to that. In the background, I could hear voices. My mother asking who he was talking to. Vanessa saying something about the news coverage. The sound of my family gathering to shore up their version of events, protecting themselves from the consequences of actions they still didn't understand were wrong. Look, Derek said finally. Mom's in bad shape. This could really hurt her. The legal fees alone. And if she loses the house because of fines or judgments, where is she going to go? That's not my problem to solve. She created this situation. She can face the results. So that's it? You're just going to let your own mother end up homeless? I looked around at my gutted house, at the decades of careful craftsmanship reduced to rubble, at the environmental hazard they'd created, at the structural damage that could have collapsed and killed someone. She didn't worry about making me homeless when she destroyed my house. Why should I have more concern for her situation than she had for mine? Because you can afford it. You just said you're worth millions. She's not. Vanessa's not. We're regular people dealing with regular problems. Regular people don't commit felony property destruction. Regular people don't expose their children to environmental hazards through illegal demolition. And regular people take responsibility for their mistakes instead of expecting their victims to clean up the mess. Catherine Ross appeared in the doorway, gesturing that she needed to speak with me. I told Derek I had to go and ended the call before he could launch into whatever new argument he'd prepared. "We're moving forward with charges," Catherine said. "Criminal mischief, destruction of historic property, environmental violations for the asbestos disturbance. Your mother and sister will be arraigned next week. The contractor faces additional charges related to unpermitted work and fraud." "What kind of penalties are we looking at?" "Depends on their cooperation and ability to make restitution. Best case, heavy fines and probation. Worst case, jail time, especially for the contractor. The environmental violations carry mandatory penalties that I can't waive even if I wanted to." James joined us, adding, "The civil suit is filed. We're seeking full restoration costs plus damages for lost use of the property during repairs. Even if they can't pay it all, the judgment will follow them. Any income they earn, any assets they acquire, we can pursue." It was everything I'd said I wanted the night before. Accountability. Consequences. Justice served through proper legal channels. But standing in my destroyed home, listening to the machinery of justice engage, I felt hollower than I'd expected. This wasn't satisfaction. It was just the exhausting necessity of defending something I'd loved against people who should have protected it. "One more thing," Catherine said. "The media attention is significant. This case is resonating with people who care about historic preservation, about family boundaries, about women building businesses. Your story is bigger than just one destroyed house. I don't want my story to be about this. I want my story to be about the work. The buildings I've saved. The communities I've helped develop. Not about family dysfunction and legal battles." "Sometimes we don't get to choose which part of our story gets told first," she said gently. "But you can shape what comes next. How you handle this, what you choose to do with the attention, that's still yours to control." After they left, I stood alone in the ruins, surrounded by the gap between what had been and what would need to be rebuilt. The house could be restored. The materials could be sourced or replicated. The structure could be stabilized and strengthened. But the innocence of working on this project because I loved it, without the weight of family drama and public scrutiny, that was gone forever. My phone buzzed with a message from Vanessa. Just 4 words. "I'm sorry. Please help." I stared at those words, trying to determine if they represented genuine remorse or strategic positioning. Sorry for what, exactly? Sorry she destroyed my house, or sorry she'd been caught? Sorry for years of dismissal, or sorry the consequences were finally arriving? And help with what? Help avoiding responsibility, or help becoming someone who wouldn't need to be told that destroying someone's property was wrong? The afternoon light filtered through the broken windows, catching dust motes that hung in the air like questions without answers. Outside, the city continued its daily rhythm, indifferent to the small human drama of families failing each other in ways both spectacular and mundane. And I stood in the wreckage, holding my phone, trying to decide what mercy looked like when justice demanded its due. The arraignment happened on a Tuesday morning in a courthouse that smelled of floor polish and accumulated tension. I sat in the gallery behind the prosecutor's table, watching my mother and sister stand before the judge in clothes they'd clearly chosen to project humility. Vanessa wore a simple dress without visible logos, her hair pulled back, makeup minimal. My mother had abandoned her usual designer aesthetic for something that could have come from a department store clearance rack. Even their posture had changed, shoulders curved inward, head slightly bowed. The judge read the charges with the flat efficiency of someone who'd done this 10,000 times before. Criminal mischief in the first degree. Unlawful destruction of historic property. Environmental violations. Each charge carried potential jail time and mandatory fines. Tyler faced additional counts related to his contractor work and the fraudulent assessment he'd given about the foundation. Their lawyer, someone Derek had found and was apparently financing, argued for dismissal based on family relationship and lack of intent to cause harm. The prosecution countered with photographs of the destruction, documentation of the historic designation, and environmental reports showing hazardous material disturbance. The judge listened without expression, then set bail conditions that included staying away from my property and prohibiting any social media posts about the case. Vanessa's face crumpled at that last restriction. Her entire identity was built on sharing every moment of her life online, curating her struggles for sympathy and her victories for validation. Being silenced was perhaps the most painful consequence she'd faced yet. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered like gulls around scattered bread. My mother and sister moved quickly to a waiting car, heads down, while I stood on the steps and gave a brief statement that James had helped me prepare. Historic properties belong to all of us, not just the people who own them at any given moment. They're part of our collective heritage, and their preservation is everyone's responsibility. What happened to my home was not a family disagreement about decorating choices. It was the destruction of irreplaceable architectural elements that can never be recovered. I hope this case reminds people that we're all stewards of history, and that stewardship requires respect for what came before us. The questions came rapid fire after that. Was I seeking reconciliation with my family? Would I drop the charges if they apologized? Did I feel that legal action was proportionate to what was essentially a well-intentioned mistake? I answered the ones I could and declined the rest, then left with Marcus before the circus could escalate further. "Your mother looked destroyed," he said as we drove away. "I've never seen her so diminished. She destroyed my house. Now she's experiencing what destruction feels like from the receiving end. Are you okay with that? Seeing her like that?" I watched the city pass outside the window, buildings I'd helped develop or preserve scattered among the ordinary commercial sprawl. I don't know what I'm okay with anymore. I know what's legally necessary. I know what's professionally appropriate. But personally, I feel like I'm watching a play where I know all the lines but can't quite remember why any of this matters. Patricia had invited me to dinner that evening at her home in the West Hills, a mid-century modern masterpiece she'd spent 30 years restoring. I arrived to find her garden glowing in the late afternoon light, every plant chosen for its historical authenticity to the home's era. "You look exhausted," she said, handing me a glass of wine before I'd even fully entered. "I haven't been sleeping well. Every time I close my eyes, I see the house the way it was. Then I wake up and remember what it is now." We settled onto her deck overlooking the city, and for a while, we just sat in comfortable silence. Patricia had been the first person to recognize that my interest in old buildings wasn't nostalgia but genuine understanding of craftsmanship and design principles. She'd hired me for my first major project, trusted me with decisions that could have ended my career before it began, and taught me that preservation wasn't about freezing things in amber but about honoring their essence while allowing for evolution. "The Preservation Society wants to give you an award," she said eventually, "for bringing attention to the vulnerability of historic properties, even those that are officially designated." "I don't want an award for having my house destroyed." "No, but you might want recognition for how you've handled it. Pursuing accountability through proper channels instead of just writing a check and sweeping it under the rug. You had the resources to make this go away quietly. You chose transparency and consequences instead." I sipped my wine, considering. My family thinks I'm being vindictive. Derek called it excessive. Said I was using my money and power to punish them for making a mistake. Do you think that's what you're doing? I think I'm holding them accountable for actions they've never faced real consequences for. My whole life, they've moved through the world assuming their intentions mattered more than their impact. Mom meant well, so her judgmental comments about my choices should be forgiven. Vanessa was just trying to help, so destroying my work in the process shouldn't count against her. Derek was looking out for the family, so his dismissiveness about my career was actually caring. Patricia nodded slowly. Intention divorced from impact is just another form of privilege. Exactly. And I'm tired of being the one who absorbs the impact while they get credit for good intentions. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Below us, Portland spread out in its familiar geography of neighborhoods and bridges, the city I'd helped shape through my work even as my family remained oblivious to my influence. Your mother called me, Patricia said. 2 days ago. I think she found my number through some old college directory. I turned to look at her. What did she want? To understand, I think. She kept saying she didn't recognize you. That the daughter she knew would never pursue legal action against family. She wanted me to explain when you changed, what had happened to make you so hard. What did you tell her? I told her you hadn't changed at all. That you'd always been exactly who you are, she just hadn't been paying attention. I told her that the Emma I've known for 15 years has always valued craftsmanship, always insisted on accountability, always believed that work should be judged on its merit rather than the identity of who created it. The only thing that changed was her ability to ignore those qualities. My throat tightened unexpectedly. How did she respond? She cried. Said she'd failed you as a mother. Then she asked if I thought you'd ever forgive her. And you said? Patricia met my eyes directly. I said that forgiveness wasn't something she should be asking about right now. That she needed to focus on understanding what she'd actually done and why it was wrong, not on managing your response to it. That asking for forgiveness before doing the work of genuine change was just another way of avoiding accountability. I laughed, though it came out more bitter than I'd intended. I bet she loved that. She hung up shortly after. But Emma, I meant what I said. Your mother is still trying to control the narrative. She wants to fast forward to reconciliation without going through the painful process of actually changing. Don't let her rush you into premature forgiveness just because the discomfort of consequences is hard for her. We finished dinner as the city lights began their nightly illumination, each building a small assertion of human presence against the gathering dark. Patricia told me stories about other preservation battles she'd fought, properties saved and lost, the ongoing negotiation between progress and history that defined her career and now mine. The house can be restored, she said as I was leaving. It will take time and money, but the bones are still good. The foundation you kept strong. The structure can be stabilized. Some things are gone forever, yes, but other elements can be saved or faithfully replicated. It won't be exactly what it was, but it can be something equally beautiful if you're willing to do the work. I knew she wasn't just talking about the house. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to my hotel room. Derek appeared in the lobby at 8, looking like he'd dressed in the dark and hadn't slept much better than I had. The concierge called up to ask if I'd see him, and after a moment's hesitation, I agreed. He stood awkwardly in my suite sitting area, taking in the upscale accommodations with visible confusion. This is where you've been staying? The Heathman. Yes. My house is uninhabitable, if you recall. Right. Of course. He sat without being invited, then immediately stood again, too agitated to settle. I need to talk to you about Mom. The legal fees are crushing her. The bail conditions mean she can't work. She does home staging for her real estate friends, but she can't be in anyone's property unsupervised now because of the court restrictions. She should have thought about that before breaking into my house. She didn't break in. She had a key. Having a key doesn't grant permission to demolish someone's home, Derek. We've been over this. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. Look, I know you're angry. You have a right to be angry. But this is destroying her. She's not sleeping. She's barely eating. She's talking about how she's ruined everything and maybe we'd all be better off without her. That pulled me up short. Is she suicidal? I don't know. Maybe. She's just so defeated. And Vanessa's not much better. She lost her remaining sponsors. The apartment management company is evicting her for non-payment. She's talking about moving back in with Mom, but Mom might lose her house because of the fines and legal fees. I walked to the window, looking out at the city I'd helped build while my family's world collapsed. Part of me felt the pull of old patterns, the familiar role of being the one who solved problems, who sacrificed to keep everyone else comfortable. But another part, the part that had been dismissed and mocked for years, resisted that pull with surprising strength. What do you want me to do, Derek? Drop the civil suit. Let the criminal charges play out, fine, but don't bankrupt them with damages they can never pay. So they get to destroy my property and face no financial consequences? How is that accountability? They can't pay what they don't have. You're trying to extract blood from stones. All you're doing is guaranteeing they'll never recover financially. I turned to face him. They guaranteed their own financial situation when they made their choices. I'm not responsible for protecting them from consequences they earned. But you could help. You have the resources. You could make this easier. I could. But should I? Should I once again absorb the impact of their actions so they don't have to feel uncomfortable? Should I sacrifice what matters to me so they can maintain the illusion that their choices don't have costs? Derek stared at me. When did you become so cold? I'm not cold. I'm boundaried. There's a difference. Cold would be enjoying their suffering. Boundaried is refusing to prevent suffering they brought on themselves while also not helping them avoid the lessons that suffering might teach. That's just semantics. The result is the same. Our family is falling apart. Our family fell apart years ago, Derek. We just pretended otherwise. I built a successful business while you all assumed I was failing. I restored a historic house while you all thought I was wasting time. I created something meaningful while you all focused on appearances over substance. The family you're mourning never actually existed. It was just a story we told ourselves to avoid dealing with reality. He sank back onto the couch, defeated. So that's it? You're just going to let them suffer? I'm going to let them experience the natural consequences of their actions. What they do with that experience is up to them. They can learn and grow, or they can keep blaming me for not rescuing them. Either way, that's their choice, not my responsibility. After he left, I sat in the quiet luxury of my hotel room and cried for the first time since finding my house destroyed. Not for what was lost, but for what had never really existed, the fantasy of a family that saw me clearly and loved me for who I actually was. That family had never been real. Facing that truth was somehow more painful than watching my house get torn apart. My phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. The structural engineers had completed their full assessment. The restoration was possible but would take 8 months minimum and cost significantly more than initial estimates. He'd attached photos of the detailed plans, showing how they'd stabilize, repair, and replicate each damaged element. I scrolled through the images, seeing my house transformed into technical drawings and material specifications. It would be beautiful again. Different in ways only I would notice, but beautiful. The question was whether I had the heart to see it through, knowing that every board replaced and every tile reset would remind me of what had been destroyed and who had destroyed it. Patricia's words echoed in my mind. The foundation is strong. The structure can be stabilized. It won't be exactly what it was, but it can be something equally beautiful if you're willing to do the work. She still wasn't just talking about the house. The plea deal came through 6 weeks after the arraignment. Vanessa would plead guilty to criminal mischief and environmental violations in exchange for probation, community service, and restitution payments on a schedule her public defender insisted was the best she could manage. My mother faced similar terms with steeper fines due to her role in organizing the demolition. Tyler lost his contractor's license permanently and faced 6 months in county jail. I sat in Catherine Ross's office reviewing the terms, each page outlining payments that would extend for years, monthly amounts that represented significant portions of income neither my mother nor sister reliably earned. The restitution wouldn't come close to covering actual restoration costs, but it was something, a legal acknowledgement that what they'd done had measurable value that needed to be repaid. They want to know if you'll agree to these terms, Catherine said. If you push for trial, we'll likely get convictions, but the sentences might not be much harsher, and it would drag out for another year at least. I thought about a year of court dates and testimony, of reliving the destruction over and over, of keeping this wound open while the press documented every moment. What about the civil suit? That proceeds separately. This plea deal doesn't affect your right to pursue damages. Though realistically, collecting on a judgment against people with no assets is an expensive exercise in futility. So I can bankrupt them further while knowing I'll never actually recover my losses. Essentially, yes. The system isn't designed for situations like this, where the wrongdoers are family members without resources. It's built on the assumption that either relationships will lead to informal resolution or that defendants will have assets worth pursuing. I signed the agreement accepting their plea deal, my signature feeling heavier than it should have. This was justice, technically. Accountability through official channels. But it felt hollow, like winning an argument with someone who would never actually understand why they'd been wrong. The restoration had begun 2 weeks earlier, a full hazmat team removing contaminated materials before the real work could start. I visited the site every few days, watching as the house slowly transformed from crime scene to construction zone. The crew Marcus had assembled were artists in their own right, specialists who understood that matching a 100-year-old finish wasn't just about chemistry but about respecting the hands that had done the original work. "We found something," the lead carpenter said during one visit, gesturing me to the dining room. They'd removed the damaged built-in hutch and discovered original wallpaper beneath, perfectly preserved in the protected space. Arts and crafts pattern in colors that had stayed vibrant while the rest of the house aged around it. "We can preserve this section, build a display case into the new hutch so you can see what was here originally." I touched the paper gently, seeing my grandmother's world revealed in these hidden patterns. She'd covered this with the hutch decades ago, probably thinking it outdated, never knowing she was preserving a perfect time capsule. "Yes. Do that. Make it visible." The work became meditative, watching skilled hands repair what careless ones had destroyed. Each visit showed progress, the house slowly healing from its wounds. It would never be exactly what it was, but Patricia had been right that it could become something equally beautiful, different in its details but true to its essence. 3 months into the restoration, Vanessa asked to meet. We arranged to see each other at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory where neither of us held advantage. She arrived early, I noticed through the window, sitting with her hands wrapped around a mug, no phone visible, no performance being staged for an invisible audience. "Thank you for coming," she said when I sat down. Her face looked different without the careful contouring and ring light optimization, younger but also more worn, like someone who'd stopped spending energy on the facade and found exhaustion underneath. "You said it was important." I wanted to apologize. Really apologize, not the kind where I'm trying to make you forgive me so things can go back to normal. I understand now that there's no going back. I waited, letting the silence stretch until she filled it honestly rather than with practiced phrases. "I destroyed something you loved because I thought I knew better than you what you needed. I never asked what you wanted. I never considered that your choices were deliberate. I saw your house through the lens of what would make good content, what would get me views and sponsors back, what would prove I was still relevant. I never once thought about what it meant to you." "No, you didn't. Mom's the same way. She saw your life as something that needed fixing because it didn't match her template for success. We both did that. Made you wrong for being different instead of trying to understand the difference. Why now? Why this realization after everything that's happened?" Vanessa looked down at her coffee. "I've been doing community service at a historic preservation nonprofit. Part of my plea deal. I spent last week helping restore original woodwork in an old schoolhouse. It took me 6 hours to refinish one door properly. 6 hours of careful, precise work to bring out the grain and match the finish to what the original craftsman did. And I kept thinking about your floors, the ones we ripped out in 20 minutes, and what it must have taken to install them the first time. The care and skill. The intention in every board. 1,800 hours, I said. That's how long I'd spent on those floors. Stripping decades of paint and varnish, repairing damage, refinishing each board to bring out the original beauty. 1,800 hours of work destroyed in less than an afternoon. She flinched. "I can't fix that. I can't pay you back. The restitution they've said is $40 a month for 10 years, which doesn't even cover the cost of one tile I threw in the dumpster. I'm going to spend a decade paying for something I'll never actually repay. So why are we here? Because I wanted you to know that I finally understand what I destroyed. Not just physically, but the work and love and intention you'd put into it. I wanted you to know that the community service isn't punishment anymore. It's teaching me to see what you always saw, the value in preservation, in doing things slowly and carefully, in respecting what came before. I studied my sister, trying to determine if this was growth or just another performance, authenticity or adaptation. Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe the point was that she was trying, making different choices even if the motivations were still evolving. I'm not dropping the civil suit, I said. You need to know that. The judgment will stand even if I never collect. I understand. I deserve that. But I'm also not going to actively pursue collection. The monthly payments through the criminal restitution are sufficient acknowledgement. I don't need to financially destroy you to prove a point. Her eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. Thank you. Don't thank me. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because continuing to pursue money you don't have would cost me more in energy and anger than it's worth. This is about my peace, not your relief. We sat in uncomfortable silence for a while, the gap between us visible but perhaps slightly less unbridgeable than before. She'd done damage that couldn't be undone, violated trust that couldn't be simply restored. But she was trying to understand, which was more than I'd expected. After she left, I drove to the house. The restoration was in its final phase, craftspeople installing replicated elements that matched the original profiles and materials. The floors were done, new oak milled to match the old pattern, finished with techniques that approximated the original process. They weren't the boards my grandmother had walked on, but they honored those boards in their careful recreation. Marcus found me standing in the living room, running my hand along the new built-in shelving that precisely matched the proportions of what had been destroyed. 8 months, 2 weeks, 3 days. We're done. Final inspection is tomorrow, but I wanted you to see it finished. I walked through each room, seeing my grandmother's house restored but different, like a translation that captured the meaning if not the exact words. The foundation was strong, the structure sound, the details faithful to the original vision even where they couldn't be original materials. It was beautiful in a way that acknowledged both loss and renewal. What do you think? Marcus asked. I think it's proof that something broken can be repaired if you're willing to do the work. That loss doesn't have to be permanent. That honoring what came before doesn't mean freezing it in time, but understanding it well enough to carry its essence forward. I moved back in the following week, sleeping in my grandmother's house for the first time in 9 months. The rooms felt familiar but new, like returning to a place you loved after a long absence and finding it both changed and unchanged. I lay in bed that first night, listening to the house settle, feeling its bones around me, solid and restored and mine. My mother never asked for reconciliation. She served her probation quietly, downsized to a modest apartment, found work that matched her actual skills rather than her imagined status. We existed in parallel lives, aware of each other but no longer entangled, the forced separation creating space for something that might eventually become authentic relationship if we both chose to build it. The house became what I'd always intended, a private workshop where I could design and dream, surrounded by history that reminded me why the work mattered. And sometimes, standing in the restored rooms, I'd remember the destruction and the rebuilding, and understand that both were necessary for me to finally claim this space as fully mine, defended and restored by my own choices rather than inherited expectations. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.